clown in the cornfield. It was supposed to be a harmless Halloween tradition, an annual corn maze held at the edge of town. Every year, the high school seniors would sneak in after it closed, daring each other to find the center of the maze in total darkness. I didn't want to go, but my best friend, Eric, wouldn't let it go. "Come on, Lily," he said, nudging me as we approached the towering stalks. "It's just a maze. What's the worst that could happen?" I glanced at the others, 4 of us in total. Eric, always the fearless ringleader. Sophie, who stuck close to him, pretending to be braver than she was. And Caleb, the quiet one, who looked just as uneasy as I felt. The maze stretched out before us like an endless wall of corn, the cool October wind rustling the dry stalks. The moon was bright, but the paths inside were shrouded in shadow. "I heard they hired some actors this year," Sophie said as we stepped through the entrance. "Clowns mostly." Eric grinned. "Perfect. I hope they try to scare us." But something about the way she said it made my stomach twist. The first few turns were uneventful, our flashlights bouncing off the walls of corn as we joked and laughed to keep the tension at bay. But as we moved deeper into the maze, the air grew heavier and the laughter faded. "Do you hear that?" Caleb asked, stopping in his tracks. We fell silent, and for a moment, I thought I heard it too, a faint giggle carried on the wind. "Probably another group messing with us," Eric said, but even he didn't sound convinced. We pressed on, the paths growing narrower and more confusing. The corn seemed to close in around us, the rustling louder now, like something was moving just out of sight. Then we saw it. At the end of the path, illuminated by a patch of moonlight, stood a clown. It wasn't like the fun, goofy clowns you'd see at a birthday party. This one was grotesque, its face painted stark white, with dark, smeared eyes and a jagged red grin that stretched far too wide. Its costume was filthy, the once bright colors faded and stained. It stood perfectly still, watching us. "Okay, very funny," Eric called out, waving his flashlight. "You're not scaring anyone." The clown didn't respond. "Maybe we should go back," Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. "No way," Eric said, taking a step forward. "It's just some guy in a costume." Before any of us could stop him, he threw a rock at the clown. It hit the figure square in the chest, but instead of reacting, the clown tilted its head to the side, its grin somehow growing wider. Then it moved. Not like a person, but like a marionette, its limbs jerking unnaturally as it started to walk toward us. "Run!" I screamed, grabbing Sophie's arm and dragging her down the nearest path. We sprinted blindly through the maze, the sound of heavy footsteps and high-pitched giggles echoing behind us. "Which way?" Caleb shouted, his voice panicked. "I don't know," Eric yelled. We reached a fork in the path and split up, Eric and Caleb going one way, Sophie and I taking the other. The giggles seemed to follow us no matter where we ran. Sophie tripped, falling hard onto the dirt, and I turned back to help her up. That's when I saw it. The clown was standing at the end of the path, its head cocked to the side, holding something in its hand. A long, curved knife. "Lily," Sophie whimpered, clutching my arm. "We need to go." But my legs wouldn't move. The clown took a step closer, dragging the blade along the ground, the metallic scrape sending shivers down my spine. Finally, my instincts kicked in, and I yanked Sophie to her feet. We ran as fast as we could, the stalks whipping at our faces, the laughter growing louder and more distorted. We burst into a clearing in the center of the maze, gasping for air. "Eric! Caleb!" I shouted, spinning around. No answer. The clearing was eerily quiet, the only sound the rustling of the corn. "Where are they?" Sophie whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Before I could answer, a balloon floated into view, drifting lazily into the clearing. It was red, smeared with something dark, and tied to a small, bloody shoe. Sophie let out a choked sob. "No, no!" The giggles came again, louder now, surrounding us. I turned in circles, clutching my flashlight, but the stalks were too thick to see anything. Then the clown stepped into the clearing. Its grin was impossibly wide now, its hollow eyes gleaming in the moonlight. It held up the knife, pointing it at us like it was inviting us to play. "Stay back!" I screamed, grabbing a broken piece of wood from the ground. The clown just laughed, a deep, guttural sound that made my stomach churn. It lunged. I don't remember much after that. I swung the wood blindly, Sophie screaming beside me. Somehow, we made it out of the clearing and back into the maze. We didn't stop running until we burst through the entrance, collapsing onto the ground in tears. The others were never found. Every year since, I've heard stories about people going missing in the corn maze, but I don't tell anyone what I saw, because sometimes late at night, I still hear that laughter, faint and distant, like it's calling me back. The clown under the streetlight. I'd heard about the clown sightings in our town. Everyone had. They started as harmless rumors. Stories of a clown wandering the streets at night, standing under streetlights, motionless. People said it never moved unless you got too close. Then, it would disappear without a trace. I never believed the stories. They felt like the kind of thing teenagers made up to scare each other. But last night, I learned the truth. It was late, nearly midnight, and I was walking home from a friend's party. The streets were deserted, the air crisp and quiet. The only sounds were my footsteps echoing off the pavement and the faint hum of the streetlights. I turned onto Elm Street, a shortcut I often took to get home faster. It wasn't well lit, but I'd walked it hundreds of times before without a second thought. As I passed under the first streetlight, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A figure, standing perfectly still, just outside the halo of the next light. It was a clown. At first, I thought it was some prank, a leftover Halloween decoration someone had set up to spook people. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a mannequin. The clown was tall, unnaturally so, with long, spindly limbs. Its costume was faded, the once bright reds and yellows dulled with age. Its face was painted in stark white, with large, red lips curled into an exaggerated grin. But the most unsettling part was its eyes, dark, hollow sockets that seemed to stare directly at me. I stopped in my tracks, every instinct screaming at me to turn around. But I didn't. I don't know why. I couldn't help myself. Something about the clown was mesmerizing, like it was daring me to come closer. "Hey!" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. "What are you doing out here?" It didn't move. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint buzz of the streetlight overhead. I took a cautious step forward. Is this some kind of joke? Still nothing. I was close enough now to see the details of its face. The makeup was cracked, peeling in places, revealing pale, grayish skin beneath. Its grin seemed impossibly wide, stretching almost to its ears. Then it tilted its head. The movement was slow, deliberate, and horribly unnatural, like a puppet on invisible strings. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. I don't want any trouble," I stammered. "I'm just trying to get home." The clown raised one hand, pointing a long, bony finger at me. And then it laughed. The sound wasn't human. It was a low, guttural chuckle that built into a high-pitched cackle, echoing down the empty street. My legs felt like they were made of lead, but somehow, I managed to turn and run. I didn't stop until I was back under the glow of the streetlights on my block, my chest heaving, my lungs burning. I glanced back, half expecting to see the clown following me, but the street was empty. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. For a moment, I just stood there, trying to convince myself it was over, that I was safe. But when I turned around, I saw it. The clown was standing in my living room. It didn't make sense. The door was locked. The windows were shut. But there it was, towering over me, its grin even wider than before. I backed away, my hands searching blindly for something to defend myself with. "Stay back!" I shouted, though my voice was shaking. The clown didn't move. It simply raised one hand and pressed a finger to its lips, as if shushing me. Then the lights went out. The room was plunged into darkness, and I felt something cold and sharp brush against my arm. I screamed, swinging wildly, but my hands hit nothing but air. When the lights flickered back on, the clown was gone. I searched the house from top to bottom, every shadow and corner, but there was no sign of it. This morning, I found something on my porch, a balloon tied to the handle of the door. Scrawled on the balloon in jagged black letters were 3 words. "See you soon." Now every night, I leave every light in my house on. But I know it's not enough. Because once you see the clown, it never stops watching. The clown in the carnival ruins. I never wanted to go to the old carnival grounds. Everyone in town knew to stay away from that place, especially after dark. The stories were too many to count, missing pets, strange noises, sightings of a shadowy figure in the distance. But that night, my friends dared me. "Come on, Mia," David teased, his flashlight casting long shadows on the cracked asphalt. "What's the worst that could happen?" It's just some broken rides and graffiti. It's not just broken rides, Emma said, her voice lowering dramatically. People say the clown is still there. The clown? I asked, already regretting my decision to join them. Emma nodded. Back when the carnival was open, there was a performer, a clown named Smiley. They said he had a real knack for scaring people, like he enjoyed it too much. Then one night, a kid went missing after a show. The next day, they found pieces of him. The police searched the grounds, but Smiley was gone. They never found him. Some say he's still here, waiting. David snorted. It's just an urban legend, Mia. Don't let Emma scare you. But as we stepped through the rusted gates into the abandoned carnival, I couldn't shake the unease creeping up my spine. The place was a ghost town. The ticket booths were shattered, and the once vibrant rides stood frozen in decay. A carousel loomed in the distance, its horses faded and peeling. The wind howled through the broken Ferris wheel, and the faint scent of rust and rot filled the air. Let's check out the funhouse, David said, shining his flashlight toward the crumbling building at the far end of the grounds. Are you serious? I asked, my voice trembling. What? Are you scared of some mirrors? He smirked and took off toward it. Emma hesitated, but eventually followed. I didn't want to be left alone, so I trudged after them, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. The funhouse was worse than I expected. The paint on the walls was faded, the once bright colors now muted and streaked with grime. Broken mirrors lined the corridors, some cracked so badly they distorted our reflections into grotesque shapes. This place is creepy as hell, Emma muttered, her flashlight flickering. David laughed. It's just old. Nothing scary about. A faint giggle echoed through the halls. We froze. What was that? I whispered. David shrugged, though his bravado seemed to falter. Probably the wind. But it wasn't the wind. The giggle came again, louder this time, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. Who's there? Emma called out, her voice shaking. No answer. We huddled together, our flashlights darting across the walls. The air felt heavier, like the building itself was pressing in on us. Then we saw him. A clown emerged from the shadows, his face partially hidden in the dim light. His costume was tattered and filthy, the bright patterns faded into a muddy mess. His face was painted white, with a wide, red grin that stretched unnaturally across his cheeks. But his eyes were empty black pits, and they locked onto me. David swore under his breath. It's just someone messing with us, he said, though his voice wavered. The clown took a step forward. Let's get out of here, I said, already backing away. David hesitated, but Emma grabbed his arm, and we turned to run. The halls twisted and turned, every path looking the same in the flickering light. The giggles followed us, growing louder and more distorted. This way, David shouted, leading us through a narrow passage. We burst out into an open area, a room with shattered mirrors on all sides. But when I looked at the reflections, my blood ran cold. The clown was everywhere. He stood in every mirror, grinning and waving, though when I turned around, the room was empty. What the hell is this? Emma screamed, her flashlight darting around. Then, one by one, the mirrors began to crack. The sound was deafening, a chorus of shattering glass that drowned out our screams. I grabbed Emma's arm, dragging her toward a door at the far end of the room. When we burst outside, the air felt like a slap to the face, cold and sharp, but the relief was short-lived. The clown was there, waiting for us. This time, he was holding something, a long, curved blade. He tilted his head, his grin somehow stretching even wider. Run! I screamed, and we bolted toward the gates. The sound of heavy footsteps pounded behind us, accompanied by that awful, high-pitched giggle. David tripped, falling hard onto the cracked pavement. I turned to help him, but Emma yanked me forward. No! We have to keep going. I didn't want to leave him, but the clown was already closing in. David's scream was cut short as the blade came down. Emma and I didn't stop until we were out of the gates, gasping for breath. I turned back, expecting to see the clown chasing us, but the carnival grounds were silent and still. We need to call someone, Emma panted, her face pale. But when I looked down at my phone, the screen was blank. It wouldn't turn on, no matter how many times I pressed the button. Mine's dead too, Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. We ran all the way back to town, but no one believed us. The police searched the carnival grounds the next day, but found nothing. No body, no clown, just the same crumbling ruins. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard a faint giggle outside my window. When I looked outside, there was a single balloon tied to my mailbox, swaying gently in the breeze. And scrawled on it, in jagged red letters, were two words. "Come back!"